Welcome to another episode of Let's Start Justice with the Jamaicans for Justice team. But it's a team of one today because Jade Williams, my co host and our policy and advocacy specialist, is out in the field doing a community intervention, and I believe that is being done with the Domestic Violence Intervention Center that is with the Jamaica Constabulary Force. My name is Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ. All right, we're also joined in studio by Mr. Stuart Jacobs. We won't have Mr. Jacobs on just as yet, but just letting you know that we do have him as a guest and we will get to him shortly. But before we get into the program for today, just some housekeeping matters as we normally do. We're focusing on the topic of safeguarding child's rights in the country and the role of the family and communities. And it's such an important topic, and sometimes you listen to the news headlines and the stories and the lived experiences of people. It's a little bit shocking, and you wonder how these things can happen in the country. So we're going to be getting into that. The last 15 minutes of the program, we're going to be discussing that CARICOM Heads of Government meeting that was had yesterday at the Jamaica Pegasus Hotel, ably hosted by our Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness. And we saw, for example, the chairman of the CARICOM making announcements and so on. So we will discuss that and the matter of the legal claim being pursued by JFJ and Stand Up for Jamaica. We'll also be discussing that 15 minutes. But before we get into those areas, just recapping some of the human rights issues that arose in the news cycle last week. We heard from the opposition spokesperson on justice, Donna Scott Motley, a proposal that would see the fines that can be imposed by parish court judges being moved from Jamaica $1 million to $5 million. To put in perspective for our listeners, there are 5 court levels in Jamaica, and the parish court, which would be our second court level, there are limitations that the parish court judges must adhere to. And the limitations that I speak of is the fines that can be imposed at that court level, which is moving from $250,000 some years ago to the now existing $1 million. The parish court judges can't impose more than 3 years term of imprisonment, I believe, as well. As we talk about reducing the court backlog, in other words, freeing up the space so that you can have more matters being heard on a timely basis, so more people can get justice. Donna Scott Motley made that proposal, and we saw where Justice Minister, the Honorable Delroy Chuck, responded favorably to say this is something that the government had been looking at from before and certainly would be considering as well. The other thing coming out from last week's news cycle, which I believe is worth mentioning, we saw where the Standing Finance Committee met last week, Tuesday, and you heard from the different cabinet ministers what they're proposing to spend each for the year actually. And what jumped out at me is the Ministry of Constitutional and Legal Affairs and the fact that they are proposing some $100 million to assist with the public education needed among the citizenry so that we know what we mean by constitutional reform. We have a sense of our governance structure and so on. I think my only caution listening to the minister, though, is that the bill to replace the monarchy that will see our own version of a president will be tabled at some point in April. I think my question to the minister and the ministry is that sufficient time for the public to have a sense of what we mean, what we're replacing the king with. The minister did note, following some questions from Julian Robinson, that there is that 3-month period, based on the time you have within the house to deliberate, especially entrenched provisions, because a referendum will be needed. You can't touch anything for at least 3 months in between, and so on. I still don't think that is sufficient time. So I'm very keen from a JFJ perspective of looking what that public education looks like, especially when we see people having little to no knowledge on our governance structure in the country. You have to talk about improving that knowledge before there can be full appreciation of what you're replacing the king with. So, a little bit of area of concern there, but we are heartened of that allocation of the $100 million that we will see towards the public education campaign necessary. All right, so let's move on. We do have a Did You Know segment for today. Very, very long, and I won't try to read that because my eyesight is not as good as Jade's. So it's coming from the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom. This is where all your rights are in the Constitution, and it speaks to Section 13, subsection 3K. And it really is speaking to the importance of child rights, what the rights are of a child on the basis of them being a minor. It speaks to the collective responsibility of all of us, the family, the society, and the state, that everything in our country, all the laws must ensure that our children are protected from exploitation, from abuse, and that is why you find that the Child Care and Protection Act, which is a statutory law, ensures that our children are protected from child labor, sexual abuse, any assault, and their rights and dignity are so protected. And that is anchored again in Section 13, subsection 3K of our Constitution. So all the children who may be listening, or the parents listening in, it means that your child, they have right to privacy. So you just don't come and bust open the bedroom door on them. We should ensure that we safeguard them as best as possible. And if my son were listening, he would say, yes, mommy, at least that is one right that you ensure that you respect. So I'm one of those parents. I knock on the child's door before I enter. My mother doesn't to this day. All right. The trivia for today. I can read that. That's a little bit bigger on the screen. And the question is, to win a credit, in what year was the Center for Investigation of Sexual Offenses and Child Abuse, we commonly call it SOCA, what year was that established within the Jamaica Constabulary Force? And if you answer that question correctly, I think, Vanessa, we have $500 credit? Not 1,000, just 5. Okay. All right, let's get into the meat of the matter for today's discussion. Last week we started with an update of a case that we read in the paper, and it spoke to a young 16-year-old girl. And having read the headline and the article, Mr. Jacobs, the question that came to our mind, this young lady has lived an entire adult life. 16, and when you look, I can't even use the word of boyfriend that is here, because this is sexual exploitation. 2 adult men, one an ex, one a current partner, for lack of a better term. And both apparently were involved in criminal activities down by Westmoreland side. And she was working, because how the headline introduced her was 16-year-old waitress. And the question that came to mind, the matter of child labor. How is this child not in school? Where is the parent or parents? Where are they? She was apparently living with her grandmother. The conversation about poverty comes in, and whether or not we can continue to say that that is sufficient reason for these types of injustices that we see. The question also came to our minds, where was the community, the village, if you will? And based on that, we're going to be discussing today the role of families and communities in safeguarding the rights of our children. And we're going to be joined by ACP Clifford Chambers, who is online for Era 1. And we're also joined by Mr. Stuart Jacobs, and you're the president of the National Parent Association of Jamaica.
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jacobs. ACP Chambers, you're online?
Yes, I'm online. I was just unmuting just now. Yes. Good afternoon to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much to both of you for joining. Let me start with you, ACP, because I listened to you on another radio program, and you outlined some of the good work being done by the JCF in this regard, but some of the challenges. If you could just recap for our listeners this particular case and some of the issues that came to the fore as you are undertaking your investigation.
Right. So some of the issues that we have in this particular case and in the parish of Westmoreland in the main is children who are bearing children and children who are in circumstances and environment that doesn't augurs well for them in terms of the foundations that should be there, that they need to learn, that they need to adopt, that they need to be a part of them. Um, those not being provided by what I would consider to be the family setting. We know of the nuclear family, we know of the extended family. But the issues we're having here is that a lot of those basic knowledge, know-how are not being extended to some of these children. And so we have children having children, we have children who are being exposed to moral danger, we have child care and protection. And so it makes their lives a little risk and so put a larger burden on us as law enforcement to help them to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have heard mention made of the recent case where a 16-year-old was shot and killed. And this is a 16-year-old who obviously had intimate relationship as a minor, obviously, and we know that the age of sexual consent in Jamaica is 16 because the person who has been arrested and charged for that offense is her ex-boyfriend. And so she has been killed. Her current boyfriend, who is an adult in his 30s, nursed gunshot wounds and actually was a person of interest in some investigations that were being undertaken by detectives in the corporate area. So we do have issues with regards to our children, and the way forward is not just us as law enforcement, but we have to take a communitarianism approach if we want to empower, if we want to add value, if we want to make the children of today be better men and women of tomorrow.
Thank you, ACP. Mr. Jacobs, we're going to take the break, but when we come back, I just want to get your perspective whether or not this was a surprising development, if you will, and just your views on it. We
Sure.
take the break. Welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We are discussing the topic of safeguarding the rights of our children and specifically the role of families and communities in that process. How can we help law enforcement a little bit more to ensure that as they execute their duties, a holistic approach is taken? We have with us ACP Clifford Chambers and Mr. Stuart Jacobs. Mr. Jacobs, just listening to what ACP said and this particular development, what were your initial reactions, if you will, and your perspective?
First of all, good afternoon, Michaela. Good afternoon to all the listeners of Bridge 99 FM,
Mm-hmm.
to ACP Chambers on the other line. And let me extend also good afternoon to all the parents of Jamaica. Listening to, learning of the news of that 16-year-old, it's heart-rendering. It goes very deep to the soul of a sorrow point. But I want to take us to the family and slash community. There are three types of births in Jamaica, children being born.
Mm-hmm.
One planned for, one that was not planned for, but the planning continues, and one that was unplanned for, and the planning stopped.
Mm-hmm.
That 16-year-old, I think, fall in the latter. Because our society, as it is, we have been shackled by some cultural norms and some of the cultural norms that we have been shackled with have somewhat dissipated. It has gone thin. And that is the extended village. When I was growing up in a what is considered a garrison ghetto community in Jamaica, although it was as it was kind, but every adult looked out for me, and my mother looked out for every other child. That very same community is no longer like that, because the adult male is preying on that 14-year-old girl, and that same adult female, she's also preying on a 16-year-old boy. And what happens that child grow up so quickly into creating for themselves their own little family, their own little picket fence, as it were, not being exposed, not being anywhere at all understanding of what adulthood is. And so adulthood, or the behaviors or the norms of being an adult, is forced on that child. And so the gap of being a child growing up is gone. And so when you have somebody who's untrained to be an adult, comes into an adult world, then there's going to be the playing around, the playing the games, and some of it is for survival, because there was never any love. There was never any attraction. And then there is this male ego in our society that is so high, that is beyond themselves, that if a woman, even if she's younger than the way out of the age group, should have an extra affair somewhere, the jealousy is so enraged that it brings out this type of violence. Because it's not that he feels that the woman has left him, but also that the man who has done it has dissed him, has disrespected him. And so there's a subculture within that obvious culture that is there.
Yes.
And it takes away the justice of what a child in Jamaica ought to be, because there's no, the lines of demarcations are just not there. They're there, but they're covered, they're camouflaged in what is considered. Do we reverse some of the curriculum that we have instead of trying so hard to pass the PEP and trying so hard to pass the CXE and the GSAT and all of those things, those exams, those external exams, but to start to teach children what their rights are, and to teach that adult what the rights of the child is, so they do not infringe on it. Let us play devil's advocate. They never know. They didn't know. Oh, she's the age of 16, so the consent is there. You can't arrest me for it. But there is a way in which this, when you coerce this child, because 16-year-old for me is still a child.
Well, by law, yes.
Well, it's still a child.
Yeah.
So don't tell me about the age of consent. And I think something should be done about that too, to further define what is consent, and to define who determines the consent, and to determine also how you go about the consenting, and if there's such a word, deconsenting. I no longer want to have anything to do with you. I want to move on. You go left, I go right. You don't impose on me in a violent way. And so education, I think, is where it begins, and it has to begin from the pre-primary level, where like in some jurisdictions I know that they speak about their constitution with such pride, and they quote it line by line, clause by clause, section by section, and it is able to be applied in what they are saying.
I want you to hold that thought, because I think one of the questions I want to pose to you, Mr. Jacobs, what is age appropriate in a society where our sense of what should be taught to children differs a little?
If you leave it till he's 21. No joke.
ACP, you know, we were conducting a research here at JFJ on the attitudes and perception towards rape in Jamaica. We need to publish those findings quickly. But ACP, when we were down by Trelawney, St. and St. James side, a couple of things jumped out at us. When we asked this question about age of consent, there were different views that it should remain at 16, go up to 18. We anticipated that. But down in the rural communities, several women especially said it should be reduced from 16. And when we probed the why, they said because the girl child is already so bad and trying to catch the big man, then you should ensure that the big man is protected from these children, the girl child who want to catch them and entrap them. So the law should protect these men by reducing the age of consent. So there seems to be something unique happening down that side. So just generally speaking, what is your data saying on the ground regarding rape and matters involving children? You touched on it a little bit earlier, but if you could delve a little bit deeper in terms of what your data is saying and some of the situation happening down there.
Right. So based on the arguments, what I'm seeing obviously is a breakdown in societal norms, because there's no way that one should, in our current society, speaking about reducing any age of consent. So just quickly before I get to the statistics, I can agree that legislation kind of makes things a little bit confusing. And I'll add that the comment made by my colleague there with regards to education for the parents is very, very important, because one do not understand that they have a role as it relates to the upbringing of their children, and that they can be charged criminally if they don't live up to the roles. So even that mother can be charged for an offense for allowing a child to be in need of care and protection just by comments like that. And so we're seeing the gaps as it relates to the age of consent, which is 16. We're seeing the issue as to the age at which a person can be charged criminally, which is above 12. Under 12, they can't commit an offense. We're seeing the age of adulthood where you can vote, 18. And so we have these issues, and different legislation give different things. So with regards to offenses such as rape and having sex with a person under the age of 16, in Trelawney, the parish that you referred, it is prevalent. Encouragingly so, however, is that Trelawney boasts a clear-up rate with those crimes. It's in the 90s, so almost all those offenses, once they're reported, they're cleared. So with regards to sexual-related offenses, it appears to be an accepted norm where mostly the female seems not to have much of an issue. And even some of the reports are made only because like an auntie or a grandmother or someone say, no, this is not right, and push for it to be reported. And so we have these issues. The social intervention model that was mentioned before, where we speak of a community raising a child, that's how we grew up in rural Jamaica. But we have to accept the dynamics of changes. Now you have high-rise building. We're now moving like in a first world country. You may live in an apartment and you don't even know your neighbor. And so it speaks to the importance of the primary nucleus of who we are, which is the mother, father. And so it is important that the comment made earlier on about education of the parents is important, because you can still own one of these apartment complex and you're still not a parent, because a parent is not necessarily a person who just have a child. You have to understand your roles and your responsibility and liability if you don't live up to your roles and responsibility. So having a formal education system there will help. But we look at sexual related offenses, but it is far more than that. Last year, over 100 children have been murdered.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, over 12 children have been arrested and charged for murder, similar to shooting. So most of these major offenses are being committed by and are being committed on children. So we kind of have a bigger problem. Children are being recruited into gangs. And that only happens if that vacuum is created where the proper parenting or the proper social agents to capture the mindset of the child is just not there, whether it be the home, whether it be church, whether it be the school. And so we do not have these social agencies in the community that lends itself to look at the children who are vulnerable and to get them in. And so we have a lot of agencies in the JCF, like the Community Safety and Security Branch, that we do have those meetings. We have widely publicized meetings. We have community walkthrough. We have police youth club and a number of entities that we try to see how best we can have that mesh, that net, to guard against these children who, from the home, are not exposed to the proper care that they should be, and to say we can out from a communitarianism approach to ensure that they themselves are not, they don't fall to be off to be the worst or to be a part of a criminal organization and so on. So but with regards to what you asked,
ACP, hold
it's
that thought for
unfortunate
me
that
so
these
you can finish out.
yeah.
Because we have to take the break. I don't want Bridge to remove me off air because they have to make the money. Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We're talking safeguarding child rights, roles of families and communities, and we're joined by ACP Clifford Chambers as well as Mr. Stuart Jacobs. ACP, let me just allow you to finish the thought as you were responding to the question asked before the break.
In closing, I was appalled at the research, because we are aware of it on the ground as well, and it is one of the initiatives that the Community Safety and Security Formation of the JCF is tackling head on in going into these communities and educate, advise, and empower these children and as also these parents where we observe gaps like this happening. So we're doing the work, and we just trust and hope that the message will be accepted and that learning will take place. And so we can have, better thought processes in these children, these mothers, these girls going forward.
Yes. Before you leave, ACP, I have one more question for you. But from your side, Mr. Jacobs, what do you see as some of the interventions necessary that must be done and perhaps currently being undertaken?
Deep dive into the education part of it. I have some testimonies. I also think one way of intervening is to use the churches. When I say churches here, I mean especially the established churches that owns and operates the schools.
Yes.
So we're talking about the deep traditional churches that have a particular message of human, not proselytizing, not hell and heaven, not that type of preaching. One that teaches about community development and character building and soul searching from a humanistic way and community. I think the churches have a lot to offer, and if they are used properly, they will certainly be one of the advocacies for this, the avenue in which we can use it. Another is we have some very talented singers and DJ artists in the country. Get them together, sit them down, give them some good lyrics with a good music bed, and let them do the same way how they can have our children listening to that type of message. We can get them to listen to this type of message.
Yes.
And so we can use that. And I think also the curriculum could be shaped and formed a bit where it is compulsory, it is deliberate that some of these things are taught in schools. And then to isolate parents into different groups and service clubs, and again the churches to teach it some more. Ask the preachers to preach it from the pulpit. Yeah, ask them.
Yeah. Mr. Jacobs, please stay with me a few more minutes.
Sure,
I want to engage you a little bit more. But ACP, before you go, another trend I see emerging in when we look at crimes involving our children is underage children are committing heinous crimes. You touched on it with the guns, but sexual assault is something. I don't know if it's the news headline bringing it to the fore or if it's something new emerging in society. But I recall a headline again down by I think St. James thereabout, one of those parishes. A child, I think 14 or 15 years old, police engaged him, asked him his name. He gave wrong name. He was involved in rape, it seemed. He gave wrong name. When the police found out his real name, apparently he was involved in a previous rape case. So I'm not sure if that is also another emerging trend or we're being alarmist based on the media headlines. I'm not sure if you can shed some light on that based on what is happening on the ground.
Right. So generally speaking, and as we have all known, children live what they learn. We have to understand the dynamics of a criminal element, and you don't just become a criminal overnight. You do the little things, then you move up, then you move up. And what we have in Era One, and I think it affects everywhere, is crimes and crime family tend to adopt and adapt. So a child that, for example, that is a part of, whether it be an extended family or a grouping of persons who care and provide care and guardianship for the child will adapt based on what they live, what they see, what they observe, and what they learn. So if this child, for example, is living among criminals, among scammers, 99% of the time, if law enforcement or anyone who they presume to be in law enforcement say, what's your name? They're not going to give the correct name. They're not going to give their correct address because it is a means through which they survive, if you will, by being anonymous. Most of the times they do not have ID on themselves. And so it is hard for police to discern exactly who they are until, you like do the necessary processing and so on. So, it is the environment that create, that edify, that advise, and that cultured some of these children into who they are. And so they don't even know some of the things that they are doing in terms of the extent. But with regards to committing a crime, they may see it as the norm because that is what is happening in and around them.
Yes.
You have people even glorifying the scamming, accepting that it is something to be accepted, and they are of that view because of how it is accepted in and around their presence. So, in short, it is the environment that they are a part of that somehow develop their thought processes and advice how they respond and what they do and what they say, and their whole the way in which they generally have an outlook on life.
Yeah, thank you so much, ACP. We appreciate it, and I hope we can join you to see what interventions we can support from our end. Really appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Thanks. Mr. Jacobs, you've been talking about parental intervention, and I just wanted to discuss with you for a few minutes. What more can be done? You were talking about separating and grouping the parents and having them being trained. Because, it's something that we debate here at JFJ as well, that some parents ought to be held criminally liable, depending on the nature. But we also recognize that there are other factors at play, and you don't want to criminalize, for example, poverty. So where do we go with engaging our parents?
Let's pretend from the very beginning that you're dealing with a human who is oblivious to what is happening. Deep, high-seated ignorance. Pretend they don't know. And when you investigate, sometimes they genuinely don't know. Then there are other cases where it is seen as survival.
Mm-hmm.
Survival in a lot of ways. If you don't do it, then you have to move out of the community. If you stay in the community, you have to pay a price.
Mm-hmm.
And the price is a sacrifice in your child, yeah?
Yes, especially communities with high levels of crime and
Crime
gangs.
and
Yeah.
gangs. Recruiting. And then there is another side of it. It happened to me, so it must happen to you.
Mm.
It happened to my sister, so it must happen to you. So the generation must continue. Nothing is wrong. And it's not because they're cruel, but it has become a changed norm. Because we have lost a bit, like 2 generations have lost high morals and ethics and values, and not wanting to blame, but I think successive curriculum builders have taken away from the curriculum the things that would lay the platform, the base structure.
The intrinsic, the softer
Soft
things.
Yes. They took civics out of school. They took it out. They took education of storytelling out of the school, and our culture of Anansi and Brother Tukuma, those things, they took them out of the society. They took them away. What were they replaced with? They were replaced with Looney Tunes, Nickelodeon. They were replaced with other cultures that does not teach our values. And so a 32-year-old mother or father is that same parent in the inner city, and don't be fooled by it. It doesn't happen in inner city alone. These behaviors are not on the inner city alone. It's driven by poverty somewhat, but it is also driven by the lack of knowledge, and it's driven by the almighty living now, the fast way of life. I no longer will go home and season the meat for tomorrow and make the dumpling and peel the yam and peel the banana and go through an hour and a half of preparing a meal that no longer exists.
But even things like the truancy officers, I remember my mom telling me when she was going to school back in the day, and if you don't read school, you have somebody coming, where is the child?
Yes.
You don't really have that anymore.
No.
It's the teachers, I think, they have such burden
Yes.
that they have to be playing the truancy officer to be calling a parent, where is your child today?
Yes.
They have to be playing social worker, and so I don't know.
Guidance counselor.
Everything, because you have one guidance counselor, for example, serving several schools. My mom is a teacher, so I'm speaking from a place of understanding.
Right.
One guidance counselor come Monday, Tuesday at her school, then Thursday, Friday at another school, and that type of rotation, and the issues are so deep. How do we fix some of those things? I hear the JTA president, for example, saying we need more social workers. So what more can be done, though? Because children having children.
Investments in more guidance counselors, because it's not been taught at home. The home has been lost.
Yeah.
The home has been lost. We have lost it. We have lost it to the fast lane. We have lost it to migration. We have lost it to the almighty dollar. We have lost it to social media. We have lost it to generation continuation. And so the school is where the last of the last frontier to save the school, because if the education system can really buckle down and look at some of the know the root causes, but to spend the money where your mouth is, literally speaking, where your mouth is, and have more guidance counselors. Ideal for me, 1 in every 25. 1 in every 25. Because if you don't do it now, you're going to be in serious problem.
Watching the money, but you're not recognizing that in the long-term society.
1 in every 25 student in the school. It all dependent on the school also, and and the trend of behavior within the school, which is coming from usually the community that embeds itself around the school. So to fortify yourself from this behavior coming in and going back out, and the cycle continues, is to have stronger guidance counselors in schools.
Yeah. All right. Last word from you, Mr. Jacobs, before we have to close.
Know your rights, and a lot of people went through a lot of injustice to themselves for us to have what we consider a justice system. And I'd like to congratulate Jamaicans for justice, for what you have been doing. You're not just in the news for when the election comes around, but for other things. And what you have done is to keep us on the even keel, and you have made the rudder of our ship as far as knowing our rights to come out to the front, that we are not taken advantage of. We need more people like you, Michaela, that dedicate yourself to looking at those the voiceless, and giving real justice a chance. So continue to do so.
Thank you so much. And just to say that NIA, National Integrity Action, they had a democracy in school club. So I look forward to talking to the principal director, Daniel Archer, on that, and I know we can help to bolster. But thank you so much, Mr. Jacobs, and we shall speak more.
Definitely.
All right, have a great day. Thank you. We take the break, and then we come back to talk Haiti, as well as Dr. Lloyd Barnett's book on explaining the Constitution to Jamaicans. Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. In the next couple minutes, I just want to share some thoughts with our listeners on some developments. So, firstly, Dr. Lloyd Barnett, constitutional expert, as he's often referred to. We had the opportunity to attend his launch last week, where Dr. Barnett wrote a second edition of his book explaining the structure of the Constitution. And some new developments are there, breaking down local government structure, what is in the Constitution, some key questions that you should be thinking about. He speaks to, for example, areas right to jury trial, which we don't have in our Constitution. The question is, as you heard recommendations coming from Bert Samuels and Clyde Williams last week, should we have that entrenched in our Constitution as a right to trial rather than the abolition of it as being recommended by some? Very, very good book. I do recommend people to read it. It speaks about the structure of the Senate and these key things that really helps you understand your constitutional rights, but the structure, power and authority of our government. And I'm shameless in plugging this. JFJ also has a Know Your Rights book that you can get. Ours is a little bit different in focus because it spells out your constitutional rights to you. What is in the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom, your right to vote, freedom of religion, and so on. Very, very good book from JFJ as well. And just to indicate, you also have another book written by Justice David Batts, who is a judge at the Supreme Court level, that speaks the Constitution. So 3 books that I know of, and I can say, based on the reputation of Justice Batts, very good book. I haven't had the opportunity to read as yet. I've looked at Dr. Barnett's book, very, very good book, and I can say that JFJ's book is also a very, very good book. So please take all 3 because the perspectives will be a little bit different, and then when you read them, it's so important for you to know your Constitution, and you can say, I have a constitutional right to this according to section here, because once you know your rights, it's very difficult for people to breach them, especially the state, and then we can stand up a little bit more based on what we know we are supposed to be getting. And last week you heard us having a discussion, should we be looking at our social and economic rights, for example? And these books will give you a greater perspective in understanding what is and what ought to be. Now, and by the way, I'm just sharing this news, not for entertainment purposes, because I'm not a fan of the artist. So Vibes Cartel, for those who are following the news cycle, his particular matter will be, the judgment will be coming from the Privy Council on Thursday, March 14th, I think about 11 a.m. Jamaica time. You should have a sense of what that is. And I'm only mentioning it here from JFJ because of the jury issue that you see coming out. Because when you look at what the judges by Privy Council were looking at, it seemed to be the issue of the jury and, how the jury was managed during that process may or may not lead to that conviction being overturned. So very, very, very key developments there. But I do take note that there are some aspects of our system and how jury management was certainly in question following the deliberations and the oral delivery that we heard with the Privy Council appeal on behalf of Cartel and his co-convicts. Now, Haiti. For those who are paying attention to the news cycle, you would recognize that our Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, hosted CARICOM heads of government here yesterday at the Jamaica Pegasus Hotel. And the chairman of CARICOM, Dr. Irfan Ali, made some announcements. And I want to quickly point out, by the way, you had others who were there, Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados, former Prime Minister of Bahamas, Perry Christie, Bruce Golding, as well as other dignitaries, ambassadors and so on. For example, Ambassador Noah Perry. Several diplomats were there, as well as representation from Haiti. We also had the U.S. Secretary of State, Blinken, was there as well. What were some of the things that came about that I found to be of interest? Now, there is a transitional presidential council that is to be established. And basically, it would act as a sort of interim cabinet to ensure that Haiti goes through a process of having an election very, very soon in the country. And I think it would be remiss of me not to indicate that Prime Minister Ariel Henry has since resigned as Prime Minister of Haiti. And you know that his position was of question in terms of a legitimate government following the assassination before. Now, with the Transitional Presidential Council, it will have 7 voting members stemming from political party and 2 non-voting members from civil society and the interfaith community. Also of interest is that the United States will be offering some more funds, $133 million more. $100 million will assist Haiti in broader security and so on. And then $33 million focusing more on humanitarian aid through food and other supplies necessary. Why is Haiti of concern for us? I want to put in perspective that Haiti is a CARICOM member. Jamaica is a part of the Caribbean single market and economy here. Us talking about full free movement of our nationals across the different CARICOM countries. And, I think we need to ensure that Haiti, the first free black nation, is supported. It's overrun by gangs now. Jamaica has a critical role to play. But what was interesting, listening though to the discussion, at no point we heard the matter of refugee status coming out of that deliberation yesterday. Several news reporters, Kimon Francis from the Jamaica Gleaner, for example, asked the question, where are you at CARICOM with the refugee issue happening? Why are we just automatically denying Haitians any due process whatsoever based on international law, based on Jamaica's own refugee policy? And, I listened to Dr. Ali answer the question, and his response was, let us focus on stabilizing Haiti first. And with the greatest of respect to the CARICOM heads of government, stabilizing Haiti must be of utmost importance. However, CARICOM has a duty to ensure that they respect refugee laws, the policies that they themselves have signed on to. And with that, at the very least, you should ensure that you are processing people with a rights-based approach. And I think it is also important to note here that Melania Lane the attorney at law who has been at the forefront of this discussion has filed an appeal for the 37 Haitian migrants with the Minister of National Security. And the appeal process is fraught with problems because you're appealing to the Minister of National Security who at first denied, refugee and asylum claims to the 37 Haitian migrants. So, much to digress and digest, if you will. But we keep asking CARICOM to fulfill what the principles of CARICOM envisioned. You do not adhere to what you have signed on to when things are hunky-dory. We have to ensure that while we practice economic pragmatism based on the size of your population and so on, at the very least, the rights of our Haitian neighbors ought to be respected, ought to be maintained. And we support Attorney at Law Malini in her quest of advocating for the rights of our Haitian neighbors. And the very last thing I want to point out in the next couple of seconds is that we heard from Pernell Charles Jr., the Minister of Labor and Social Security, that the Occupation Safety and Health Act will be tabled sometime soon. Decades have passed since that promise of the OSHA. And the OSHA, by the way, would ensure that labor laws and matters of diversity, responding and respecting to people's HIV status within the workplace setting is so respected. Very, very key, important bill there. And JFJ will, of course, be writing to Minister Charles to get an update on when we can expect that bill to be tabled. But I have to get off air now. It's now 2 o'clock and I'm out of time. But who is the winner of our trivia? Do we have a winner? No? So we will pay attention to our social media pages and ensure that we advise the winner. You have until end of day because very, very easy question to answer. But anyway, that was Let's Start Justice. Next week, we will be on air. I won't be here next week. It will just be Jade alone. But thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate your listenership always. And keep on bigging up the show as well as Bridge 99 for hosting us. Have a good Tuesday.